Marketplace is supported by Certified Financial Planner Professionals. Learn more about CFP professionals at letsmakeaplan.org.
Look, we told you it was going to be a big week. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Rubrik. When cyber attacks put businesses at risk, Rubrik provides the power to bounce back fast. More at Rubrik.com. And by Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, whose scientists laid the foundation for CDK4/6 inhibitors, which are increasing the survival rate for many advanced breast cancers. Danafarber.org/everywhere.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Ryssdal. It is Friday today. This one is the 3rd of May. Good as always to have you along, everybody. This was, as I believe we promised on Monday that it would be, a very dense week, economic news-wise. Much happened, much to discuss here. Thankfully, to do all the heavy lifting are Gina Smilik from the New York Times and David Gura. He is back at Bloomberg. Hey, you two.
Hey, Kai.
Mr. Gura, we start with you. The jobs report this morning, 175,000 new jobs. The jobless rate ticks up to 3.9%. If Jay Powell had designed this, he could not have done it any better. Discuss.
Yeah, I think that he's got to be pretty happy with what we saw in that labor report this morning. It certainly engenders more confidence in the Fed that it's on the right track. You know, good sign that the Fed's actions are successfully, and I should say not dramatically, slowing down the economy. We saw wage growth moderating, average hourly earnings up, but less than forecast. The Fed has this dual mandate, of course. We've talked an awful lot about inflation in recent months, recent years. But of course, the jobs market is a huge focus of the Fed's. And, it's something that the Fed chair did nod to in that press conference earlier this week, the tightness of the labor market. But yes, a lot of concern about what the Fed's, future approach is going to be. I think this probably gave him a lot of solace to get the report that he got this morning.
Gina, all of that discussion of the labor market, one thing came through pretty loud and clear, and that was, I don't want to say how they're emphasizing wages, but they are looking at wages, and Powell said, in essence, look, wage growth has to slow, not stop, but slow, and it kind of did in this report.
Yeah. It was kind of a somewhat confusing, or at any rate, very nuanced message that Chair Powell gave us about wages this week. He first very clearly said, we don't target wages. And then he said, but in fact, wages are too fast for us to sustainably achieve our inflation goal. So, clearly we are watching wages. It made it pretty obvious that they are still a little bit nervous about the speed of wage increases. And this report had to be good for them in that regard. It's just one number. It did not align particularly well with what we've been seeing in the employment cost index, which is another wage measure. It's a little bit more dated, and it's one that the Fed pays a lot of attention to. So I don't think that this is like the end of this story by any means. We're still going to have to watch for further confirmation that wages are still wage growth is in fact coming down. But I think this is the cooling they've been looking. Not because they're like horrible people who don't want people to get wage gains, but rather because they're worried it will feed into inflation.
Right. So, David, let me ask you this. So you're back at Bloomberg. You're on the podcast side of the shop now. It's called The Big Take. Everybody should obviously follow or subscribe. You and Kate Davidson and a colleague had a discussion a couple of 4 days ago about, sort of the pivoting that the Fed has been doing, what they did back at the end of last year, saying, it looks pretty good, and we're thinking about maybe, cutting rates a couple of 3-4 times, and how then the data comes in and sort of smacks them upside the head in January, February, and March. And I guess I wonder now, number one, a sigh of relief coming from the Fed chair's office, but also, is another pivot-ish in the offing, do you think?
It's funny. There was this moment at the Fed meeting back in December when Powell came out and he said that they'd had a conversation about cutting rates. And we obviously saw the excitement that caused in the market. And since then, we've kind of reckoned with the stimulative effect that had on the U.S. economy. And that's what I talked about with Kate Davidson and Anna Wong from Bloomberg Economics as well. And how since then, the data have kind of gone against that. And we've seen kind of the expectations for those cuts being pushed back more and more and more. And leading up to the meeting this week, Jay Powell on the sidelines of the IMF meetings in Washington gave this kind of more hawkish, more hawkish comments when he was there with the governor of the Bank of Canada. And there was this expectation that maybe at this last meeting, he was going to take a more hawkish tack, that there was going to be this other pivot. And we didn't see that this week. I mean, I'm curious what Gina was in the room. Maybe she has a better sense of sort of the tone from the Fed chair, having been there in person. But he didn't make that hawkish pivot as fully as I think we thought he might, or the expectation was that he could in light of the data that we'd gotten. And again, in light of the jobs report that we got today, maybe he's coming out looking pretty good in light of how that played out.
Gina, what do you think? Read the room for us, would you?
Yeah, I think he worked really hard not to make a hawkish pivot. You know, if anything, he like leaned into dovishness in this.
Define some terms, Gina. Define hawkish and dovish.
Yeah, absolutely. So hawkish meaning that you have a favor or a bias towards increasing interest rates, and dovish meaning that you have a bias towards lowering them. What we heard from Jay Powell at this press conference is really that they don't think that the next move is going to be a rate increase. They do think that the next move is going to be a reduction. And then he laid out a couple of scenarios in which they could cut rates. And I think, interestingly, some of those scenarios didn't necessarily involve like realized declines in inflation.
Right.
If the job market starts to fall apart, that couldn't get us to cut rates. And I thought that was interesting because I think it sort of wasn't the message that Wall Street was bracing for, as David just alluded to. And it was, much more sort of the general story hasn't changed. Inflation is coming down. We think inflation is going to keep coming down, and we still expect the next move to be down, not up.
Yeah, I did love he gave like a triple-headed, multivariate approach to paths and ways this thing could go, which to me was fascinating. David, let me ask you this. There was some discussion of the balance sheet, the Fed's balance sheet at this meeting, and how they're going to slow the roll-off of it. Tell us why it matters and what it means.
Yeah, I mean, there's this tricky tension here that the Fed obviously has piled into bonds and mortgage-backed securities over the last number of years pretty significantly during the pandemic, and there's been this effort to unwind that portfolio to get rid of them. And the trickiness of the tension is that when it comes to the value of that portfolio, by raising rates the way the Fed has, it's actually that the value of that portfolio has actually come down. I mean, I think what this showcases is just the trickiness of moving away from that period of quantitative easing, of the Fed getting so involved in the bond market. And I will say, if this is something that you're interested in, there's a book called Limitless that I can recommend.
Give the plug.
I want Gina Smilik, and I'll give her the plug, and she can take it from there.
Gina, the balance sheet. Help people understand.
The balance sheet. Oh man. Well, so obviously, I think this is a really interesting juncture because the Fed's telling us that they are going to slow down their process of shrinking this balance sheet, which they amassed.
Ooh.
This thing during the pandemic because they're buying lots of bonds to keep markets from falling apart, and then later to sort of stimulate the economy. This week they told us that they've been shrinking it, but they're going to shrink it more slowly. The point of that is basically twofold. A, they want to keep shrinking it. Like they want to be able to get it smaller than it is now. But B, they don't want to do that in a way that completely ruptures financial markets, which they did in 2019. Mm-hmm. And so the last time they tried to shrink the balance sheet, things didn't go well. They're trying to
Well, maybe we just lost Gina. It did not go well. Oh, there she is. She's back. Gina, we lost you for a second, but that's all right. Just in time because we got to go anyway. Gina Smilik at the New York Times. Limitless is her book about the Fed. David Gura back at Bloomberg. The Big Take is his podcast. Y'all should subscribe. Thanks, you too. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Guy.
At the corner of Wall Street and Broad on this Friday, it was one of those slightly disappointing news, less good than you had hoped for jobs report is actually very good news. It was one of those days. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. Protests that we've been seeing on college campuses the last 3-4 weeks are not the first time that divestment has been at the heart of students' demands. And since we are the show that we are, we're going to talk about the economics of the policy debate that has been happening. Allison Taylor teaches at the Stern School of Business at New York University. Thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Could you do a little compare and contrast just to start with? The case study of divestment and student protests is South Africa in the 1970s and 1980s. How is that similar to or dissimilar to what is happening now on college campuses?
Well, I mean, the first point to make is that many of the protesters are framing this as very, very similar to apartheid. So there are many people trying to draw direct comparisons. There is also a history in the anti-apartheid movement, which is important to flag up front, took several decades to succeed. But a lot of elements of that movement focused on divestment and focused on college endowment. That said, there was a lot of consensus that apartheid needed to end, and just questions about how much divestment would work or not work in driving that goal. Here we've got a much, much more contentious and divisive situation.
I wonder if you could also comment on just the nature of the global economy 40 or 50 years ago versus today.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's much harder, I think, to target particular companies. Many investments are in big index funds. There are also wider questions about the degree to which you target companies directly. And many of the protesters are saying target Boeing, target Airbnb versus targeting the banks and other entities that fund these corporations.
Right. You mentioned endowments. Let's discuss for a moment, because based on the information we have, and we should say that endowments are notoriously not transparent, it does seem that the companies and the endowments in question, the percentages are, decimal points worth of single-digit percentages of these endowments that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's, again, a real question of whether the students are trying to achieve just, I do not want my university to be associated with this entity, or whether they're actually trying to get something concrete done with money or political decision making. And I think depending on what your goal is, you would take a very different approach to these endowments.
Right. So it's using the economic threat to leverage policy. That's what they're trying to do anyway.
Yeah, I think they're also trying to shift hearts and minds, so that, the other point here is that there is a debate about whether divestment works. Over the short term, there is not a lot of evidence, for example, that divestment campaigns hit stock prices. But the evidence that divestment does work is more about shifting hearts and minds and social norms. And so if you can, over time, make a particular sort of investment or a particular sort of business decision morally unacceptable, then you can move the needle and money will move. But this is a very, very long-term goal, and it requires, there to be a fair amount of societal consensus around whatever the issue is over time.
So as the scholar of this in this conversation and that long duration that you're talking about, do you think this moment sustains? Apartheid, as you said, was a fairly clear-cut issue. This is, on virtually every level, not clear-cut.
Well, I think that's right. And so I think it is a difficult argument to make that what we're going to see is a widespread shift in, how Americans or how American universities see this issue. I think there's also certainly a scenario where these protests actually have the opposite effect than the protesters intend.
Discuss that. Keep going.
Well, because I think the way that the protests are being seen and treated by the media is certainly having the impact of convincing people that this is just, this is a position that the students are taking that is not productive. Why this issue? Why now? Why this country? Why not the other human rights violations going on? What exactly are we trying to achieve and how? And so you've got both the conversation about whether divestment works and then the conversation about what the ultimate goals are.
Right. Allison Taylor at the Stern School of Business at NYU. Ms. Taylor, thanks for your time, ma'am. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Back to Marketplace in just a moment. I'm Dave Miska alongside Kate Grossman. You're listening to 91.5 WBEZ, and today is World Press Freedom Day. That's why Kate and I are talking to you, the people. Your support today is crucial in sustaining access to trustworthy news, and you can defend a free press and democracy itself by standing with us today. It's really important, especially now, to stand for free press. Things are, the uncertain times, if you will. Now more than ever, you need someone to tell you the truth, and that's why we're here. That's our mission here at WBEZ. You can help us today, 888-915-9239 or online, wbez.org/donate.
Dave, and one of the things we do really well here is accountability journalism, and that's long been a crucial antidote to systemic inequalities, inequities, corruption, and mismanagement. So here at WBEZ, some of our reporters invest months, sometimes even a year or more, to delve into some of the complex issues that we face and expose hidden truths. So that's things like extremism in the ranks of Chicago Police Department ranks, in the police department, to investigating whether Chicago kept its promises to the communities in our neighborhoods when it closed a record 50 schools 10 years ago. So if that's kind of work that is meaningful to you, call us, 888-915-9239 or wbez.org/donate.
Kate, we also focus on uplifting a range of potential solutions to the issues we expose. It's not just the complaints. We all try to help figure out how the solution is. By empowering you with reliable reporting while presenting possible solutions, we aim to inform you, inspire hope, catalyze action, and spur meaningful change. That's why we're here. We're hoping to change the community for the better. And that's why you listen, so that you're informed and you can help your community, the people around you, and improve the situations in all of our neighborhoods just around us here. 888-915-9239 or online, wbez.org/donate.
And I think that's reflected in this comment from Virginia in Oak Park, who told us, WBEZ is the sound of my childhood, riding around in the back seat, sitting in the driveway because we couldn't miss the rest of the story. It feels like home. When I just need to relax, I put on WBEZ. So very cool. Love to hear it. Thank you for sending us that. If you feel like Virginia does, call us 888-915-9239 or wbez.org/donate.
See, Virginia rides around in the back seat. That means this is generational. Whole families listen. People have listened for generations. It means we're a longtime friend to you. And if we're a friend to you, maybe $10 a month is the way you could support us. That gets you the World Press Freedom Tote Bag if you become a sustaining member at that $10 a month level. If everybody donated $10 a month, imagine what we could do. We can do a heck of a lot more than we are now. And we do a lot, but we want to expand that and be here in the future for you. 888-915-9239 or online, wbez.org/donate.
And you could be like Brian in Chicago. He says, I consume WBEZ more than any other single media source. So I'm always happy to support this great Chicago institution. Another very cool comment. So call 888-915-9239 or go online, wbez.org/donate.
You know, you're on your way home. You're going to have to make dinner. The kids came home from school, whatever it is. Take care of it now before it slips your mind. Giving $5 a month is a great way to get involved as a sustaining member of WBEZ. Maybe you won't be near the radio later or listening to us on the app on your phone. It might slip your mind. Donate now, 888-915-9239 or online, wbez.org/donate. It's super easy, and thank you.
Let's do the numbers. Yeah, the really happy music. Here you go. Dow Industrials gained 450 points today on that jobs report, almost 1.2%, 38,675. NASDAQ up 315, that's 2%, 16,156. The S&P 500 found itself 63 points to the good, 1.2%, 51 and 27. For the 5 days gone by, the Dow up 1.1%, the NASDAQ advanced 1.4%, S&P 500 added about 0.5% today. Live Nation surged 7.2%. It reported better than expected first quarter revenue. The company said it expects continued growth in concert attendance. The Berkshire Hathaway annual shareholder meeting always seems to be kind of newsworthy, so here are some numbers for you as capitalist idol Warren Buffett prepares to address the faithful in Omaha, Nebraska tomorrow. This is Buffett's 60th meeting since taking the helm at Berkshire in the mid-1960s. Buffett, by the way, is 93. He's going to answer shareholder questions for about 5 hours. This is the first shareholder meeting since Buffett's business partner, Charlie Munger, died at 99. Berkshire Hathaway, by the way, sits on more than $167 billion in cash and owns more than $300 billion in stock. Look up their A shares. It's like 6 figures plus. Bond prices rose. Yield on the 10-year T-note down to 4.5%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive Insurance. On the road and at home, customers can simplify their insurance needs and protect what's important by bundling home and auto with Progressive Insurance. Learn more about Progressive and bundling at progressive.com. And by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness and accelerating action on America's fiscal challenges to build a brighter economic future for the next generation. Learn more at pgpf.org. And by Rubrik, a cybersecurity company focused on securing the world's data. When cyber attacks put businesses, reputations, and careers at risk, Rubrik provides the power to bounce back fast and become cyber resilient. Rubrik.com.
You're listening to Marketplace here on WBEZ.
This fall, Chicago voters will elect members to the city's Board of Education. Before that happens, WBEZ's education reporters want to know what issues matter most to you. Fill out our survey at wbez.org/schoolboard.
Let's head back to Marketplace on WBEZ.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Ryssdal. The government of the United States spends, give or take, $6 trillion every year. About half of all of those trillions goes to just 3 programs: Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. They're the biggest of what are often called government entitlement programs. And as the debate over the national debt circles around yet again, talk is turning, yet again, to cutting those entitlements. But as Marketplace's special correspondent Stacey Vanek Smith reports, doing that, cutting them, is historically pretty tough.
Government entitlements are nothing new in the U.S. Actually, almost nothing is older.
Go back to the very, very beginning, 1789.
John Cogan is an economist at Stanford's Hoover Institution, specializing in fiscal policy. He says entitlements go back to one of the very first meetings of the very first U.S. Congress. Like John Adams was there.
So entitlements are as old as the Republic.
The U.S. was barely a country. We didn't have our own money yet. There wasn't even a national anthem. People used to sing this song called Hail Columbia to celebrate the new republic. Columbia was an early nickname for the U.S. because of Christopher Columbus. Also, there was no Washington, D.C. In fact, the vote for the first entitlement took place in New York City. It's where Congress passed the act to benefit Revolutionary War veterans.
The program provided pensions to soldiers disabled as a result of injuries suffered during the Revolutionary War, and pensions to widows of soldiers that had been killed in battle.
It was not a big program. Roughly $5 a month went out to about 1,500 veterans, and the benefits would only last for 1 year. That year got extended, and the program got expanded to include more former soldiers. Then it got expanded again. And finally, in 1832, 50 years after the entitlement was created, Congress expanded it to include all Revolutionary War veterans, not just those who'd been injured.
Well, all of a sudden, the applications started pouring in. And within a year, the number of people on the rolls tripled.
Revolutionary War pensions became 25% of the U.S. budget. Cogan says this is a pretty common trajectory for government benefits. They start small, targeting a very specific group of people.
Then individuals that are just outside of the eligibility rules. They're close to qualifying, but don't qualify.
They fight to get their share of those benefits.
And then Congress eventually expands the program to cover them. And you get expansion after expansion after expansion.
Case in point, Social Security. It started during the Depression as a way to get money to elderly people, many of whom were living in poverty. It is now the biggest thing the U.S. government does, by far. Tens of millions of people get checks every month, totaling nearly $1.5 trillion a year. But that huge tab, it's not because the program has been expanded so much, says Louise Shaner, an economist at the Brookings Institution.
The reason the entitlements are growing because people are living longer.
Which is partially thanks to entitlements themselves. Shaner says research finds again and again that entitlements help people, often the most vulnerable people, live longer, healthier, more productive lives. Shaner says those very real, measurable economic benefits are a big part of why entitlements tend to stick around.
When you do programs that are actually like good ideas, then you're like, let's not undo it.
And we don't have to, says Shaner. The U.S. is the biggest economy in the world. We're not hurting for cash. The debt fight, she says, is not economic.
That is about the politics. We can figure this out, but like only when people are ready to give up something.
But giving up an entitlement is just not like any other kind of compromise, says economist John Kogan. Entitlement cuts feel personal.
An entitlement program gives individuals a legal right to benefits. And in a sense, then, you're taking away a legal right. And I think that's what makes it so tough.
Kogan says major entitlement cuts have only happened a handful of times in the country's history. Usually, the programs get bigger. Take Civil War pensions. Payouts began in 1862 to veterans and their families. That program became nearly half the budget at one point. And those payments went out for a long time.
The last recipient of a Civil War pension died in 2020.
That recipient was Irene Triplett, the daughter of a Civil War veteran. She received a check for $73.13 every month until she passed away at age 90, more than 150 years after the end of the war. In New York, I'm Stacey Bannock Smith for Marketplace.
You're listening to WBEZ. Back to All Things Considered in just a few minutes. I'm Dave Miska alongside Kate Grossman, David McKay producing today, Maria Lopez on the other side of the glass. Thank you for your help today. Today is World Press Freedom Day. Look, I got so excited I got twisted up. World Press Freedom Day was established by the UN General Assembly. 31 need people easy.org.